welcome everyone to another Man Up chat. I've got Mike Bedford here. He's in an exotic location out in the chill out lounge, I think you said before we just started talking.
It's the Be Brilliant chill out lounge.
The chill out lounge, that's it. Absolutely. You need a DJ in the corner or something, don't you, really?
Well, interesting story. I don't know if we might pick up on that at all, but I used to be a DJ, so I could provide the audio.
There we go. Happy days. I'll expect that on the. You can mix that in at some point, then, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll slide into it.
Yeah, but we just kind of we've met online. We've just had some kind of conversations. We had a call before Christmas about coming on, talking about like mental health and just a loose chat. Like I said, hit the record button and let's see where it goes. But to tell me a little bit about you.
Yeah, no problem. Well, as Ian's already said, I'm Mike Bedford. I'm the CEO and founder of Be Brilliant People Development. I specialise mainly in coaching and supporting neurodivergent professionals. Tends to be late diagnosed adults.
Right.
It tends to be usually 30 plus something, and majority tend to be women. I don't know how that's worked out. I've got a theory around it, but it works well for me and it works well for my clients. So
what's the theory then? Tell us the theory then.
Yeah, so it's a theory that goes back to my younger days, I think, which we're probably going to talk about at some point on this journey. And that was I was raised by my mum, a single parent on her own, so I kind of never really had a kind of father figure, and the only kind of father figures that I had were utter. Is it okay to swear?
Of course
on the podcast? Complete utter knobheads, to be honest with you. So my image and perspective of men and role models as men was somewhat tainted growing up as well. So I think I've always found quite a closer affinity towards working with women. I talk about neurodiversity. I share my journey quite openly, in the hope that it helps others and it helps leaders, it helps individuals to be able to move forward on their journeys as well. So I go out and I talk in organisations, I attend conferences, all the rest of it, and share that lived experience, but also give people key takeaways about what they can do and how they can move forward.
Why neurodivergent? Why help that particular area of the community, if you like? Is that because you've had your own late diagnosis and kind of struggle with, like, if you're happy talking about it, then just share a little bit about it.
No, absolutely. And I think I'd just like to really kind of point out and highlight quite early on in this conversation that neurodivergent people are much greater risk of suffering from poor mental health than neurotypical people. That's just scientifically a fact. So in terms of why do I work with neurodivergent people? Well, then I am neurodivergent myself. So I do understand the challenges and opportunities of being neurodivergent as well. I wanted to create a better place, better workplaces where neurodivergent people could thrive rather than just survive. Although I had a relatively successful corporate career myself as a kind of HR leader, working in all kinds of different weird and wonderful arms of UK government, I still felt there was much more could be done to create a much more inclusive, equitable and accessible place of work as well. And I really wanted to kind of take my lessons that I'd learned from both being neurodivergent and being a senior leader in a corporate space and really help create change to disrupt the status quo that I know isn't working for a lot of people, and help try to break that wheel and help people reset and kind of put systems in place that actually help people to thrive. Because when people thrive, obviously it's better for everybody. It's better for the individuals, better for teams, better for business, better for the economy, better for everybody, basically. So it's a great space to be in. I'm really privileged that I get paid to do this and to work in this space and to be a change enabler in this space. But yeah, I mean, it was a bit of a no-brainer really for me in terms of which direction I was going to go in. Like I said, my journey has been somewhat of a squiggly line, I'd say, to be fair, in terms of getting from where I was to where I am now. Lots of bumps along the way. Maybe we might pick up on some of that as well, because I think it's very relatable to mental health as well. And yeah, I think my journey was always taking me to this place. And in terms of my own identity, I describe myself as neurospicy. Now, what that means is I describe it as there's lots of different versions of Mike happening in my head at any one time. So there's Mike, who's me at the core of everything. And then in my brain, there's an ADHD brain, there's an autistic brain, there's a dyslexic brain, and a dyscalculic brain. and Mike's brain. So there's 5 brains ticking off at any one time in my brain. Sometimes they get along nicely, sometimes they don't. Sometimes, you know, it's very difficult to kind of pull things back together for me as well. But over the years, I've kind of learned tools and strategies for kind of playing to my strengths, rather than what tended to happen in the corporate space was focusing on kind of me as a challenge rather than as an opportunity. And I want to reframe that.
Feel like you had to like suppress that and try and keep that all under wraps, because it feels like it's a lot more inclusive to talk about this stuff now than it was certainly when I kind of stepped in the workplace. And
and you have to remember that I didn't know I was, you know, neurospicy until later on in life. I always suspected, but I just stumbled through life basically. Never really been able to properly fulfill my potential because A, I didn't know, and B, if I did know, what difference would have that made actually in the workplace anyway? They'd have probably chucked a couple of adjustments at me, said, well, you can have a little bit of extra time to do this or whatever, or we'll get you a piece of software, you know, to help you with your typing or something like that. You know, we're not talking about systemic changes to the workplace culture here. We're talking about a few tweaks around the edges to make businesses feel better that they're doing something to support the people, if you're lucky. Okay. And, you know, I go way beyond that now. I'm way beyond that. I'm talking about kind of reframing the whole systems, processes and ways of working in business to support and get the best out of all of your people as well, because inclusion benefits everybody, right? Don't just benefit one sort of person or characteristic or another, it benefits everybody. So we've got a responsibility, an ethical, moral and legal responsibility to make sure we create workspaces that enable everybody to thrive and achieve the potential. And that's what I'm here to do, really.
Love that. I love the way you've described that, because actually, like you said, it makes it better for everybody, doesn't it? And a much more inclusive space. And I think there's a lot of people out there still don't believe in this stuff. They still don't believe. And I saw a post on LinkedIn this week actually who said everybody's got some degree of condition. And I think to a certain extent you kind of see it, but the other part of me is like, well, maybe they have, and maybe we're just more aware of this stuff, and maybe we're actually aware that everybody thinks and behaves differently. And there's like, I've got two neurodiverse kids. I'm pretty certain that I've got ADHD. I'll get the diagnosis at some point, so I'm acutely aware of like how my brain works very differently to other people. But a lot of people just dismiss it and be like, they're just doing it for attention, and that's it's changing, but there's still a long way to go with that stuff, isn't there?
Yeah, I feel that's a really provocative question and point there, Ian. So thank you for it, and I'll try to answer it as calmly as I can. First and foremost, anyone saying that's completely ableist. And if you don't know what ableism is, then look it up, because it's discriminatory towards people. And the reason why it is ableism and why it's ableist is that you are undermining a person's lived experiences there, first and foremost. You're saying to them that what they're saying isn't true, that they're not really kind of going through what they're going through, and you're essentially kind of reinforcing the model that's been rubbed down their throat for most of their lives. Most of these people have come from a place where they've kind of not been accepted and been made to feel like they're the problem and have to fit in. So when someone kind of says to you, well, we've all got a bit of this or whatever, and you know, actually, I'm not sure whether this is true or whatever. That's a very privileged place, I think, to be coming from, to say that. And I think it's absolutely wrong to say that. And the difference is, no, we all haven't got a little bit of insert your favorite neurodivergence, because fundamentally, people may display some traits of this or that or something, but being a little bit disorganized doesn't mean that you've got ADHD. It's how it affects your day-to-day cognitive functions and abilities to function as a human being, right? So when you start actually having a proper conversation with someone who says, well, I think I might be, or we're all a little bit this, and we actually get into it properly, probably realize that maybe they're not really actually, and they're just coming from this from a completely wrong perspective, to kind of try to make out that this is something that everyone's jumping on a bandwagon. It isn't really. You have to remember that this is a disability as well. It's an invisible disability. Now, just because you can't see it, it doesn't mean it's real. I had to compare it as much to, as offensive as that statement is to say, oh, well, where or a little bit, or I don't really believe in that. It's to say to someone in a wheelchair, I don't really believe you can't walk. Or to someone who's deaf, I don't really believe that you can't hear. That's how offensive that statement actually is. So I'd encourage people who think, you know, that they might have done that, or who think like that, to really take a look at themselves in the mirror and reframe that in their own mind and think about actually what they're saying and what impact that might have on somebody. And if indeed you are, thinking that you might be yourself on the spectrum, then get yourself looked at, get yourself supported, get some help, get some support. Might not be a formal diagnostic process you want to go through, but there's plenty of tools, support, and resources out there that you can find that can help you become more enlightened on this journey. And I say become enlightened because that's everybody's responsibility here. Everybody should be looking to kind of upskill themselves and learn about how we all have different brains and how we all function differently and how we all have different needs as well. But simply just to dismiss someone's lived experience for me feels very offensive.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like years, like I grew, like I'm 43 now, so I kind of grew up in a world where it was like, he's just a bit naughty, or he's had too many sweets, or he's hyperactive, and it was always kind of dismissed and pushed off. Like, I mean, I think interestingly, like, I read a lot about this stuff. I'm no expert, by the way. Like, obviously, you're kind of more qualified in this stuff than I am, but like, it's interesting seeing the different snippets and the different interpretations about why we're in this position and why you kind of think that way. And there's a lot of blame on technology now and giving people shorter attention spans, but there's a big difference between ADHD and having a short attention span. And the other part of me that I think about regularly is actually a lot of people being misdiagnosed with this stuff, and actually they have got that short attention span. It's a real minefield, isn't it? Because, and I've said this on something else as well, like, if you had a blue face if you had ADHD, and you had a green face if you were on the spectrum, there's easy ways to diagnose that. You can see it. It's physical, but it's very, very difficult to Joe public to kind of make an assumption, diagnose somebody with what's happening inside their head.
And I think you have to bear in mind as well, and what people listening to this show need to bear in mind, is that there is no such look as being autistic. Most people would say to me, "You don't look autistic." It doesn't have a look. It's not kind of a certain look. It's not like a fashion style. You know what I mean? And then when you take into account multiple co-occurring differences, like I described earlier on about being neurospicy, then how do I fit into a system or a mold that says you should think, act, do, and be a certain way? I don't. And I think that's the problem that many of us have faced, the challenges that we've faced, and that's why we come with a lot of trauma and a lot of distrust. And it is probably the reason why we often feel like a square peg in a round hole, and like we don't fit in places, and we don't want to be ourselves. We don't want to show you who we are. So we'll pretend to be like you. We're essentially like chameleons. We learned how to blend in because we quickly realized that we're not going to be accepted for who we are. Particularly probably my generation. I kind of went to school in like the 90s, 80s, 90s, and there wasn't really that much awareness or knowledge or support available, certainly in the schools I went to anyway. And I had to learn to survive, and to learn how to survive I had to learn how to adapt, and human beings are very good at adapting. So I learned how to adapt, and I learned how to disguise myself, who I am, kind of how I act, my emotions, and blend in with the right crowds to get by and kind of laugh along at their jokes that I didn't really find funny. Stare intently when someone needed me to make eye contact with them, which was really painful for me. All those things that you just expected to do and be, now are outdated. They're out-fashioned, they're old-fashioned, they're outdated, and they're not helpful or supportive for people. So we really need to reframe the whole perspective on what is, what do we expect from people and why do we expect that from people, and then hold a mirror up to ourselves and reflect on that question.
What was the turning point for you then, Mike? Like, was there a particular time in your life, or was it just something gradual over? Go on.
Well, I'd always struggled to fit into I struggled in mainstream education. I absolutely bombed mainstream education because I just couldn't understand the way learning was taught. And another myth to bust: neurodivergent people aren't stupid. Actually, most neurodivergent people have quite high IQs and high intelligence. I was no different. I was pretty clever. I had a high intelligence level, but I didn't really understand how things were taught in school. So the assumption was then that therefore I was stupid, and therefore there's no point bothering with me, and therefore I just played up to the stereotypes then, and kind of just bombed out of school with nothing, no qualifications, no prospects, all the rest of it. Went on trying to find my way in life, and again, that resilience, I think, being built from a very young age, because it had to be, but it takes its toll. You know, I had to kind of do that through school to survive. Then I had to do that in my formative years, coming out of school as a 15-year-old with no CV, no qualifications, no job. I had to kind of like find my way around lots of different jobs. You know, I worked as a biscuit packer. I've worked in factories, warehouse jobs, all kinds of things, and never kind of feeling again like I fit in or this is what I wanted to do, but kind of feeling like I wasn't really smart enough to do anything else. And eventually I kind of found my way into kind of like working for, I started a career as a kind of, as in textiles. I worked in kind of print industry for a while, and I became like a senior manager in kind of like textile industry, and I got that taste of supporting other people and a little glimmer of being able to be myself a little bit more, because I didn't kind of have the kind of rules and processes that were expected around me. And I kind of felt like there was something there more to explore. So after a period of kind of, which is common again in certainly in neurodivergent people, being in and out of work, so being unemployed and kind of joining the door line for a few times, I just by chance really kind of got talking to one of the work coaches, as they're called now, in the job centre, who kind of said to me, "Why don't you come and work for us?" You know, and one thing led to another. Eventually, I did, and I spent the next 25 years working through all kinds of different roles and jobs and challenges in UK government, and eventually worked my way up and got qualifications. Went back to school because the job supported me to do that. So I went back to school, got qualifications. Upskilled myself, got qualifications in business, admin, English, maths, IT, like I say, business admin. Then I went on to kind of HR qualifications, worked my way up to HR qualifications, and coaching qualifications, and so on and so forth, until I got to like master's level for qualifications. And that was from someone who kind of like just basically bombed out of school with no support whatsoever. So it's been I'm incredibly proud of my journey, but it's been a tough journey as well. And it's been times where I've really kind of like doubted myself, and I've had those reinforcing statements said to me, you know, like, what's wrong with you and all that? Why don't you just get this? And, you know, basically I've been made to feel like I've been the problem for a lot of my adult life growing up. And that has an impact on you. I'm not going to lie to you, Ian. That takes its toll. And I think when you're trying to be someone that you're not, as well, when you can't be yourself, and I'm suppressing who I am, you know, thankfully I'm starting to feel like I can be more who I am now. I'm starting to feel like the real Mike Bedford is actually starting to come out now, with all this neurospiciness as well that's been contained and bottled within me for so many years. I'm starting to be able to let that out and just really show that, you know, I wouldn't have dreamed of coming on something like this and basically having my fidget toys and stimming and really proudly displaying my sunflower lanyard now, because I'm actually really proud to be different as well. You know, I would never have dreamed that day would come all those years ago. And certainly growing up and in my first experience of like work and things like that, it got to an early point in my career where I was kind of like bullied in the workplace for being different and things like that, and that impact of being in and out of work and not being able to grasp certain things, so therefore people assuming that I wasn't up to the job and this and that, when actually if we'd have had conversations and things had been cut a little bit differently, then I would have probably thrived and succeeded. But I'm a great believer in looking forwards, not back. But I think it's important to recognise that those experiences did have an impact on me. And certainly in my mid-20s, I went through a period of depression where I was facing unemployment. I couldn't really understand what was going wrong. I blamed myself for everything. I went through this period of depression over a few months, and you know, I just became a really dark place, as anyone with depression who suffered from depression will tell you. And eventually, with good support network around me, I was able to kind of claw my way towards that light and find my way back out of that tunnel, which led me ultimately to kind of finding my way into the UK government. And for me, I've got to be honest, I think that was probably a game-changing moment. I don't really know what would have happened if I'd have just been left on my own. I hadn't have had that support network around me. I dread to think what the end outcome might have been for that young Mike then. But thankfully, I wasn't. But I'm mindful that there's a lot of people that don't have that support either. I had people to talk to, I had people to be able to pull me back. And eventually I was able to kind of, find my way out of that hole and move forward and progress. But it's always there, that kind of that mental health impact. And I think I've always been all throughout my life walking a tightrope with my own mental health. And I'm acutely aware, as I said right at the start of this conversation, Ian, that neurodivergent people are twice, probably 3 times more likely to suffer with poor mental health, because for not mutually exclusively, but all of those reasons that I've talked about already. You know, we're constantly having things rammed at us that aren't necessarily true, but kind of undermine who we are as human beings.
Well, whistle stop tour. I mean, that's
come up for air now, Mike.
Yeah, take a breather. Like that. I mean, that's amazing that you've shared all that, and I think like people will be watching this, and there's so much of that that they can relate to about kind of going through it and eventually finding your feet. And this is a bit of a difficult question probably for you to answer. Like, and it's probably two parts to it. Like, if would you do anything differently if you were kind of going through that again? And what would you suggest for somebody that's maybe going through that right now and feels like a little bit lost?
Get some support, get some help, talk to people. You know, one of the finest moments I had was when I was working in government. I trained to be a mental health first aider as well, and I think that really helped me understand, and I supported a lot of people in the workplace long before I was on my current path as well. I was already kind of coaching people back then, but actually when I started doing getting into the mental health side of things as well, it made me really realize how important early intervention is and how important talking to people really is. It can be the difference between life and death, literally, as well. You know, just having a conversation with someone. Like, I honestly think, you know, going back to myself earlier on in that conversation that we were talking about there, I think I wouldn't have been that far away from developing a plan, if I'm being honest, back then, because I was in such a dark place. I could start seeing myself thinking about those kind of like dark thoughts, you know, about, well, is it worth it, all that kind of thing. And, you know, I was so fortunate to have people there that loved me and supported me and were able to kind of, you know, I got some support from lots of different places and people, and that probably really made all the difference, and then enabled me to focus on the positives and be able to move forward slowly. I'm not saying it's an easy journey. There's a lot of kind of stumbling blocks on the way as well, but just honestly, my best advice is to just reach out and talk to someone, anybody. If you don't feel comfortable talking to anybody that's close to you, speak to the Samaritans. Whatever it is, get in touch with someone and just open up and talk to them. Don't leave it until it's too late, because it can quite easily escalate and become too late for you, and nobody wants that to happen for anybody.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that we talk about at MANUP as well. It's that first step, isn't it? Like, when you're really struggling with your mental health, it's actually, we want to try and get 2-3 steps in front of that, and like, your loved ones will notice when your behavior starts to change. You'll notice a different tone of your language. You'll start to pick up on things slightly differently as well. That's the point where that intervention needs to happen. It's like it seems to almost happen a little bit too far down the line. But as men, you know as well as me that we're very good at holding that stuff in and not really talking about it.
No, and it's destructive as well. You know, I kind of push people away as a kind of defensive mechanism. Because I didn't really want to confront my emotions and feelings. I mean, I do struggle with that anyway, being, you know, I display and feel emotions differently to somebody else. So, you know, it's probably a lot harder to spot my emotions than it would be, for example, in someone who's neurotypical, because I won't cry and I won't display the emotions that are expected of someone who might be potentially going through a tough time. So, and again, if you think about that, if someone's working in a place where they don't feel safe, they'll hide that even more. So it makes it very, very difficult. So it comes back to, I think, particularly when you're dealing with people, to create an environment, a psychologically safe environment where people can talk and can open up, and they can share with you as much or as little as they want. I mean, it's often said, isn't it, about supporting people to bring 100% of themselves to work, but actually, you know, not everyone wants to bring 100% of themselves to work either. And for me, I think that's a conversation that needs to be had, and I think that's absolutely fine. But we certainly need to create the right culture and environment where people can bring as much of themselves to work as they want, and they feel safe to be able to open up and have a conversation like we're having now. I mean, 10 years ago, I would never have had this conversation with you now. So that shows how long how much I've progressed on my own journey as well. So, you know, I'm grateful that I've been able to do that now, and I feel grateful that I'm able to advocate for those who maybe don't have a voice and who are listening to this show and thinking, I recognise some of this in myself. I'm not sure what to do. I just hope that some of the things that I talk about might be helpful for them as well.
So how would you start that? Like, how do you build that environment for people to feel safe and, like you said, share as much as they're comfortable with, not everything?
So it really has to, it's about workplace culture, isn't it? You know, and I recognise that not all workplace cultures are safe. for people as well. We can't just say that we're going to be able to wave a magic wand and all workplace cultures are going to be safe. Doesn't matter sometimes if you've got the best manager in the world. I'm fortunate that I've been supported on the whole by a lot of good managers, but I've also had a lot of shit managers as well who've kind of, again, really contributed to my poor mental health as well. So I think we have to really support managers, particularly in the workplace, to be able to not just recognize, and support people that are different, but also linked into mental health, and to be able to support people's mental health as well. I think there were a big push, certainly back in the day, to kind of basically train up as many mental health first aiders as possible. But so what? You can have 1,000 mental health first aiders in your workplace, but so what? Is that a tick box exercise, or do you actually have a complete utter strategy that's devoted to supporting people with mental health as well? Because, as I said, you can have all the people in the world, but if they don't, my experience of that was a bit of a kind of, what's the word, tokenistic approach to supporting people in the workplace. And half the time people just did it just because they wanted it to look good on their email signature or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. That's not the right way forward. We need to support people to have the confidence, because it's about confidence as well, to have the confidence and the skills to be able to have open, authentic and honest conversations that build trust. Because when you do that, then you help create that environment where, of psychological safety, where people feel safe to be able to open up to you as well. And certainly don't kind of do it in front of everybody else in the workplace or the shop floor. Don't start talking about my mental health or my challenges in front of everybody else, which I got to be honest with you, Ian, that happened to me lots of times in my career. Some poor managers who kind of felt like it were all right to kind of openly kind of say things about me that would kind of should be really kept absolute confidence. And I worked as a senior, I worked in HR and as a senior HR person as well. You got to remember that these things do happen as well, but we have to, as people, leaders and businesses have to take that seriously and have to put measures in place to kind of stop and kind of iron out those sorts of behaviours as well, because it's just not tolerable, it's not acceptable, and we really have to invest in creating the skills that people need to be able to go beyond just being a manager who just ticks boxes. And we have to create the skills for people that they can have really open, powerful conversations with people as well. Doesn't mean that you have to become an expert in neurodiversity or mental health, but it does mean you have to have an understanding of how to support people when they've got challenges, right? And I think that really is lacking at the moment. I think there's some positives in different areas, but I think on the whole, I think we've got a long way to go, and we really need to kind of really support people, especially managers, because managers, don't forget, are at the front end of all this. They're the ones who support people in the workplace as well. And if they don't feel like they've got the tools, resources and support to be able to have those conversations, then the worst case scenario is that either they just then work on assumptions about that person and that leads to negative results for everybody, or they just don't deal with it at all, as I saw time and time again in my career. And again, think about the conversation that we've had, how unhelpful that is going to be for somebody, for them and for the business. It's just not helping anybody as well. So we have to get brave, and we have to, I think part of being a leader and a manager is that vulnerability. You have to be vulnerable and be open as a leader and a manager. And you have to say, actually, I do have gaps. There's a lot of things I don't know. And, but I want to learn. I want to get better. I want to be able to support my people as well. So we have to really embrace our vulnerability and the fact that we don't know everything, and move away from this kind of like, well, being a leader or a manager is kudos. I have to know everything, and I have to look the part of a leader and look strong and all this kind of nonsense. This is nonsense. It's the equivalent of what we've described earlier, isn't it, Ian, about that kind of, well, being a man, I can't really talk about my mental health or feelings and things like that. Same with leadership and management. We have to take a more empathetic and human focused approach, I think, to leadership and management, and realize that we're human beings too, and we don't have all the answers, but we really are committed to supporting our people from a real person-centered perspective.
That goes downhill, that if you've got a manager that gives that level of support and understands that goes down to the people that they look after, that then feeds right the way through the culture of the business, then, doesn't it? And sometimes it only takes one person to be that catalyst. Like I've everything that you've said is just so relatable to pretty much everybody that's listening about any kind of change within an organization. And actually, sometimes being that catalyst and being that one person to put your head above the parapet and stick your hand up and say, actually, this needs to change, or but that's hard. That can be really hard to do that, and that takes a massive amount of courage. And I think it's also hard, like you said, if you've got the experience of your hand just being battered down time and time again, eventually you'll just stop sticking your hand up, don't you?
Yeah, and we've got to change that mindset and that attitude. And I said it's going to be easy. It isn't easy, and change, especially cultural change, takes time.
Yeah.
But I think those, more enlightened and forward-thinking leaders realize that change needs to happen, and will be committed to making those changes.
Awesome. I'm conscious of time, mate. We've covered loads of stuff on that. Like, I've loved this conversation because I've just asked a couple of questions and you've just kind of downloaded your expertise, which is amazing because that's exactly what we want, right? That's exactly what we want, these conversations. But like, I'd like to finish with one or maybe two more questions, and the first one's going to be like, how do you manage your mental health now?
Yeah.
What do you do to keep on top of it and keep it in a healthy state?
Yeah. So taking breaks for me is really important, and recognizing when I'm hitting burnout. I think because certainly being neurodivergent, I have a tendency to reach burnout really quickly because of the kind of the energy that I put into things, as well. And if I'm not mindful of that, I can overcommit to things. I can put too much in. I can just be absolutely absorbed in what I'm doing, and that comes at a risk of, for example, the most, and people listening to this who don't have that understanding might think that this sounds crazy, but actually not going to the toilet, not taking breaks, not stretching, not walking around. I can just sit for 7-8 hours solid, just kind of focused on one piece of work, and that's that, like kind of like ultra absorbed, hyper focused kind of tendencies that I have as well. And for me, I've had to work really hard in terms of my mental health and supporting my mental health to kind of take breaks, to realize when I'm working towards that. I think one of the big changes I've just made recently, if I can share, is I found myself, certainly when I was in the corporate space, never having the time to have that creative and thinking time that I need as someone who is a natural entrepreneur and a creative and a thinker. It was stifled, it was suffocated out of me. There was no time for that. It was just bang, 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 just process, just deliver all of the time. So I never had the time to kind of think, and I really needed that. And I kind of felt that had a massive impact on poor mental health for me. It's one thing that I've really been keen on implementing as a business owner for myself and looking after my mental health, is that now every day tends to be Friday. I take the day and I take no meetings, no appointments, unless by exception only. And I just have that for creative and thinking time. So where I can just think and create and be innovative and just kind of give myself that time. I look forward to it, give myself that time and space that I need to do that. But weaved into that throughout the week is, and I don't always get this right, I'm not always perfect at this, is just getting outdoors and kind of taking a walk outside, for half an hour, just to get that time I need to reset and to just re-energize myself, to decompress, because decompression is really important to me. If I don't get that time to decompress, then I can feel the pressure points building up. If you think about the kind of like the pressure funnel that we talk about, particularly in mental health, I kind of feel, I visualize the pressure funnel building and building and building, and the top rattling like man. So I need to find ways to kind of release some of those vents so the steam can come out. So I have tools and strategies in place to be able to do that. I think one of the most important things as a business owner, certainly as a neurodivergent business owner, one of the key lessons I've learned is how important it is to have a good tribe around you, to have a good team around you, to have good people around you as well. Because I think if I'd have been just doing this completely on my own by now, I'd have just burnt out and probably given up, because it had just been too much for me and my mental health. And I realized, unlike in the corporate world, where I couldn't just say, well, actually I can't do admin because I suffer from executive dysfunction. And, and I need support to be able to do that, because that's actually going to burn me out, because the most simple tasks like filling a form in, or organizing a meeting, or scheduling diary appointments, or replying to emails, an absolute mental drain on me. I can't manage it. It just absolutely takes out of me. So I've built a team around me now. So I've hired a PA now who kind of deals with that, and supports me with that. I've just hired someone now to support me on kind of like my comms work and strategically aligning that. All those things enable me to be able to focus on the things that I'm good at and play to my strengths. And for me, that's really important. And the key point I'd say to anyone listening to this is how to support your neurodivergent people is to find a way to play to their strengths, because you will undoubtedly then help them release some of those pressure points as well, and you know, give them the support and the tools that they need to be able to do that as well, because that's made such a massive difference for me. And don't question. And one of the things that I think we really struggle with, especially in the workplace, is, you know, for example, for me, if I'm kind of in the absolute kind of mode where I'm just smashing out 2 days of work in 2 hours or whatever, then what goes up must come down, right? As well. But who's there to catch me when I come down? Well, in the corporate space, nobody. I'd just fall off edge of a cliff and smash on the bottom, right? Here, I know now when that's going to happen, I need to take the next hour or 2 hours out just to decompress and reset. And that's absolutely fine, because there's not any less productivity or performance happening there, because I've delivered twice as much as my colleague who's sitting inside of me. We just have to get smarter about how we think about how we work, how we perform, and how we deliver, I think. And that's really important for people, particularly in the workplace as well.
Like, I think that, I mean, great points. And I think in the workplace, certainly in the bigger corporates where it's a big, like, and I use the analogy of like an oil tanker that takes so long to turn, it's a lot easier to do that if it's just you, and build that support around you once you've got that self-awareness, because that self-awareness has got to come first. But like those bigger corporates, it's can be very difficult to change that steer. But you like I said earlier, you need one person to start talking about this stuff, and then it becomes two, then it becomes three, and that just starts
but advocating for your needs, you know, and that's not easy either. If you can, I'm very good at being able to say what I need now as well, but it's not always been that way as well. If you don't tell people what you need, then it's going to be very difficult for them to be able to support you and provide it as well. And yeah, you know what, there's going to be some employers out there that just don't understand it, can't get it. And to use your analogy, that big oil tanker, but I'm a coach as well, so you know, I'd have to flip that around and ask, you know, the person concerned then, well, actually, is this really the right place for you if you're not getting the support that you need to be able to thrive and to be the best version of yourself, achieve what you want to achieve? You know, we have to ask ourselves difficult questions as well sometimes, don't we? And if you're being, you know, for want of a word, put into a box, stifled and crushed of all your kind of energy, aspirations, and who you are as a person, then you need to ask yourself, am I in the right place? You really do. And from an employer's perspective, do you really want to lose your best talent?
Spot on. Like, you've wrapped that up perfectly. Like that last bit of, do you really want to lose your best talent? Because that's exactly what it is if you tap in and kind of make the most of it. I've loved this conversation, Mike.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you very much for having, like, I feel like we could talk for probably a whole day about this stuff and just keep going and going and going. But like, thank you very much for coming on and talking to us at MANUP. I've loved this conversation. I'm sure there'll be people that have a great old time listening to this and can really relate to it, and I encourage anybody that does to watch it back, watch it a couple of times, because this is something in these conversations that you'll probably pick up the second or third time that you watch it. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks for being
a supporter of us, and best of luck with your journey.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Good man. I'll just turn the record button off there. Why isn't that? We've got